The day I was thrown out. The morning after my son's funeral, I woke up feeling like my chest had been hollowed out. Grief does that to you. It leaves you breathing, but not really living. I was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, the room I had been using for the past 2 years, when Stephanie appeared in the doorway, my daughter-in-law. Her arms were crossed, her expression sharp, almost impatient, as if I'd kept her waiting. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone wasn't gentle, it wasn't sad, it was businesslike. I assumed she wanted to discuss paperwork, maybe thank you cards, or what to do with David's clothes. I nodded and followed her downstairs, still moving like my body belonged to someone else. We stopped in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had cooked dinners, packed lunches, and tried to make myself useful so I wouldn't feel like a burden. She didn't offer me a chair. "I'll be direct," she said. "This house belonged to David, that means it's mine now." I swallowed hard. "Of course," I replied, quietly. She exhaled as if relieved I hadn't argued. "I need space to grieve, and having you here, it's not going to work anymore." The words hit me slowly, one by one, like cold rain. "You're asking me to leave?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yes," she said, no hesitation. "I think by tomorrow evening should be enough time." Tomorrow? I had sold my own small home 2 years earlier to help David and Stephanie with their down payment. David insisted I move in just temporarily. Temporary turned into routine. Routine turned into home. Or so I thought. "Stephanie," I said carefully, "I just buried my son." She looked away. That doesn't change reality. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. Upstairs, I packed my life into 4 suitcases. Clothes, old photographs, a few books. 67 years reduced to what fit in a car trunk. I kept waiting for her to come upstairs and say she'd spoken out of grief, that she didn't mean it, that I could stay a little longer. She never came. At exactly 6 o'clock the next evening, she stood in the doorway again. "Time's up." She watched as I carried my bags to the car, silent, observing, making sure I really left. Before I got in, I turned back. "Will there be a reading of David's will? I assume he left instructions." She actually laughed. "Why would he leave you anything? You didn't contribute to our household." The irony almost made me dizzy. I drove away and checked into the cheapest hotel I could find. That night, I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, wondering how someone could lose a husband and still manage to become so cruel. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A quiet feeling. A feeling that David hadn't been as unaware as his wife believed, and that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. 2 weeks later, while I was still living out of that hotel room, my phone rang. It was my son's lawyer, and he said something that made my hands start to shake. "Mrs. Fairfield, your presence is required for the reading of David's will." The will she never expected. The lawyer's office was quieter than I expected. No dramatic music, no tension you could touch, just beige walls, framed certificates, and the hum of an air conditioner working too hard. Stephanie arrived 10 minutes late. She walked in like someone who already knew the ending of the story. Black dress, perfect hair, confidence sitting on her shoulders like armor. She didn't look at me, not once. Her brother Marcus followed behind her, legal pad in hand, eyes scanning the room as if measuring what could be gained. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I'll read David's will in full as requested." Stephanie leaned forward. The first part went exactly how she expected. The house, the cars, the life insurance, the retirement accounts. Each item landed like a quiet victory. She nodded along, occasionally glancing at me with something that looked like satisfaction, as if to say, "See, I told you so. I sat still, hands folded, heart steady in a way that surprised me. Then the lawyer paused. "There is one additional provision," he said, adjusting his glasses, "added 3 months before David's passing." Stephanie's smile tightened. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield, I leave full access to Safety Deposit Box 337 at First National Bank, along with all documents and accounts contained within." The room shifted. "What?" Stephanie snapped. "What safety deposit box?" Mr. Morrison remained calm. "David maintained it privately. He was very specific." Marcus leaned forward. "And what exactly is inside this box?" "I don't know," the lawyer replied honestly. "David never disclosed the contents, only the recipient." Stephanie turned toward me, eyes sharp now, calculating. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Anything valuable should be part of the estate." "You're free to contest it," Mr. Morrison replied, "but the will is very clear." When the meeting ended, Stephanie cornered me in the parking lot. "Listen," she said, suddenly pleasant, "whatever's in that box, we should be reasonable. David would want us to share." I looked at her calmly. "You were very sure he wouldn't leave me anything." Her jaw tightened. "You're still homeless," she said quietly. "Don't forget that." 3 days later, the bank escorted me into a small private room. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside was a letter. David's handwriting. Familiar. Steady. "Mom, if you're reading this, then I was right about how things would unfold." My vision blurred. He wrote about the $40,000 I had given them, how he invested it quietly, how it grew, how he wanted to make sure I'd never depend on anyone who saw me as disposable. Under the letter were statements, accounts, numbers that didn't feel real. $185,000. My knees nearly gave out. There was more. Printed emails, text messages, screenshots. Stephanie's words, her laughter, her plans. David had seen everything. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Stephanie. "Would you like to come over for lunch?" she asked sweetly. "We should talk about what you found." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Yes," I said. "I think we should." The next day, I sat at Stephanie's dining table, the same house she'd thrown me out of, while she smiled and asked one question. "So, what exactly was in the safety deposit box?" And this time, I was ready to answer. The truth on the table. Stephanie had set the table like it was a holiday. Fresh flowers, her best dishes, even my favorite iced tea, the kind I hadn't mentioned in years. It would have been touching if I didn't know better. She smiled too much, talked too fast. Grief had vanished. Strategy had taken its place. "So," she said lightly, folding her napkin in her lap, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about family." I nodded and took a slow sip of tea. "I think David would want us to support each other. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, maybe we should manage it together." There it was. I set my glass down. "That's interesting," she said. "What is?" "That you're suddenly sure there was something valuable in it." She laughed nervously. "David was private. You know how men are." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "Would you like to see one of the things he kept?" I asked calmly. Her smile froze. I turned the screen toward her. A screenshot of a message she'd sent to her sister. "I can't wait until that old woman is gone. Then we can finally use the room properly." Color drained from her face. "That's out of context," she whispered. "Oh," I said gently, swiping. "Here's another. Messages about pushing me out, about money, about how easy I was to manipulate." Stephanie reached for my phone, but I pulled it back. "There are dozens," I said. David was very thorough. Her composure cracked. "He had no right to keep those." I had every right, I replied. You were talking about his mother. She pushed her chair back, breathing shallow. What do you want? I leaned back. Nothing. She stared at me, confused. I don't want your house, I don't want your approval, and I certainly don't want your money. Then why are you doing this? She demanded. Why humiliate me? I considered that. You threw me out the day after my son's funeral, I said quietly. You told me I was nothing, that I existed in your way. Her eyes filled with angry tears. You didn't realize something, I continued. David saw you, every lie, every plan, and he prepared. I placed the folder on the table. Bank records, mortgage payments, proof that everything she claimed I never contributed had been covered by my son. Then I opened the last document. And this, I said, is where it gets serious. Her voice trembled. What is that? Emails between you and your brother, discussing how to declare me incompetent so you could access my pension. She stood up abruptly. That's not true. You didn't follow through, I said, because David stopped you. Silence swallowed the room. How much, she finally whispered, how much did he leave me? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood. Enough that I don't need your goodwill ever again. Her legs gave out and she dropped back into the chair. But I'm her wife, she said weakly. I deserve what he already left you. Everything else was never yours. I walked to the door. Behind me, her voice broke. You can't just take everything from me. I paused, hand on the handle. I didn't, I said softly. You did. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed with a bank notification. The funds had officially transferred, and Stephanie had no idea. This was only the beginning. What he left me was more than money. The sunlight felt different as I walked away from the house. For the first time since David died, my chest didn't feel tight. Heavy, yes, but not trapped. I didn't look back. I spent one more night at the hotel, not because I had to, but because I wanted to choose my next step calmly, without fear breathing down my neck. The next morning, I signed a lease for a small apartment near the park. 1 bedroom, quiet, safe. Mine. When the keys were placed in my hand, I cried, not out of sadness, but relief. David had given me that. A week later, I received a message from Stephanie. We need to talk, please. I didn't reply. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned the rest. The lifestyle she thought was secure began cracking. Credit card balances surfaced. Friends she once impressed with appearances slowly disappeared. Without someone to blame or manipulate, she was left alone with herself. And that, I realized, was the real consequence. One afternoon, I opened the last letter David had written, the one I'd saved for when I felt strong enough. Mom, I know you never wanted revenge. That's why I didn't leave you anger. I left you freedom. I sat by the window, reading it slowly. He wrote that he loved her once, but he loved me without conditions. That he watched, waited, and protected quietly. That he never wanted me to feel like a burden again. Tears slid down my face, not because he was gone, but because he had stayed in the only way he could. Months passed. I planted flowers on my balcony, joined a book club, volunteered twice a week at the library. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something better. One afternoon, as I walked past a mirror in my new home, I paused. I didn't see a widow. I didn't see a woman who had been thrown away. I saw someone who survived cruelty, without becoming cruel herself. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as peace. Sometimes it comes as a son who knew exactly who you were and made sure the truth outlived him. I never spoke to Stephanie again. I didn't need closure. David had already given it to me. Final message to audience. Optional outro. If someone has ever made you feel disposable, remember this. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone failed to see it. And sometimes, the quiet ones leave the strongest legacies. The life she thought I lost. 6 months after I left that house, I ran into Stephanie by accident. I was at the grocery store, standing in line with a basket full of simple things: fresh fruit, bread, flowers for my balcony. Ordinary happiness. She didn't see me at first. Her hair wasn't styled the way it used to be. No designer dress, no confidence wrapped around her like armor. She looked smaller. When she finally noticed me, her eyes widened. "Eleanor," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite work, "you look well." "I am," I replied honestly. There was an awkward pause. People shifted behind us in line. "I heard you moved. Somewhere near the park?" "Yes." She nodded, then hesitated. "I've been meaning to call." I waited. "I didn't handle things well," she said quietly. "After David died, everything fell apart." I studied her face. For the first time, there was no calculation there, just exhaustion. "I lost friends. Money problems came up. I didn't realize how much he handled." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I hope you find your footing," I said gently, and I meant it, just not at the cost of my own peace. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I paid for my groceries and walked out into the sunlight, leaving her standing there with words she could no longer use to control me. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky soft orange and gold. The flowers I'd planted were beginning to bloom. Life had grown quiet, not lonely, quiet. Sometimes I still missed David. That ache never fully disappeared, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like love that had learned how to live without pain. One day, a letter arrived from the bank. My investments had grown again. I smiled, folded the letter, and placed it beside David's last note. He hadn't just planned for my safety, he had planned for my dignity. I thought about all the years I'd tried to make myself smaller so others wouldn't feel inconvenienced by my presence. All the times I stayed silent to keep peace that wasn't real. I was done with that life. In its place was something better: mornings without fear, nights without humiliation, and the freedom to exist without apologizing. People often think strength is loud, but real strength is quiet. It's walking away without revenge. It's choosing peace when anger would be easier. It's surviving betrayal without letting it poison your heart. David once told me, "Mom, you don't see how strong you are." Now, finally, I did. And that was the greatest inheritance of all. Sometimes the people who tried to erase you are the very ones who teach you how powerful you've always been. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or treated like you didn't matter, remember this story, because the ones who love you quietly often protect you forever.